introduce Dr. Jay Yadav, who, in my recent memory, appeared on the Atlanta and Georgia scene maybe 8 years ago with world-class qualities and qualifications, both as a medical physician, as an investor, and a startup guy. In summary, he took the town by storm and came as a star from the Cleveland Clinic and brought world-class physician, inventor, and startup capabilities focused on treatments for complex cardiovascular and cerebrovascular diseases. In 2011, just a couple highlights, because there's many, but we'll get on to actually listening to what he has to say. But in 2011, he was named one of the 50 best physicians in the history of the Cleveland Clinic. And he's a founder of AngioGuard, acquired by J&J, an initial investor and director at Smart Therapeutics, acquired by Boston Scientific. And then something that I know you'll hear a lot more about when he speaks to you is the founder and former CEO of CardioMEMS, recently acquired by St. Jude Medical. And it's focused on prevention of hospitalizations for heart failure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Ed, for this great meeting. And I can't tell you how inspired I was by Colonel Clifford's speech. I think all of us, when we were young, boys and girls, wanted to be astronauts. I know I did. That was the one thing I wanted to do. So, I did not appreciate that he actually flew in the shuttle, did a spacewalk with Parkinson's. I mean, how incredible is that? It's just, and the strength to keep that and perform at such a high level. I think that really provides an inspiration to all of us who are in the life sciences. I mean, that's what we're all trying to do in our own little way. We're trying to help exceptional people like him, as well as just everyday people, get back to work, take care of their children, or just spend more time at home with their families versus being in the hospital. And this really helps us understand why we're here and the privilege we have of being able to help people and help patients. And all of us are patients, either now or in the future or in the past. What I want to talk to you today about is really a new way to think about something that we take for granted almost, which is information. And information really can be as important as the therapeutics that we traditionally work on. I'm an interventional cardiologist. I've spent my life fixing things, a very action-oriented, mechanical, urgent type of business. And what I came to realize was that a very powerful element, which was the knowledge that we use, was missing. And if we could improve that, we could actually get treatment effects that are as large or larger than the therapeutic effects that we're used to talking about. And I'll show you today a case example of that, how the effect of information on outcomes is at least as big as the traditional treatments that we use to manage cardiac disease, certainly. So at a very high level, we can think about healthcare in this fashion. We start with information, which in medical terms we call diagnoses, right? And we use those diagnoses to make decisions or a treatment or action, right? An action in general terms, treatment in medical parlance. Now the information we have is of many different types that physicians and nurses utilize. We have the history, which is the backbone of medicine, and to this day, if you don't know what's wrong with the patient when you're done talking to them, it is unlikely you'll know after all the tests are done. Tests should really be confirmatory, not diagnostic, although most people don't quite seem to grasp that anymore. We have lots of different tests. The blood tests, many different types, imaging studies, ultrasounds, X-rays, CT, MRI, genotyping. So all of this is a lot of information. To give you some idea, it is estimated that the total quantity of healthcare data in the world is about 200 exabytes. So an exabyte is 10 to the 18, so that's 1,000 petabytes. To put it in perspective, Google has about 20 petabytes of data. So this is a lot of information. And we're adding, it is estimated, on the order of a few exabytes of new medical data every year. So a lot of information. This information is used by healthcare providers to treat patients. And the range of treatments is quite large, starting with simple things, which are very powerful, behavioral change, stop smoking, start exercising, eat less, all the way to heart transplantation. And I've highlighted medications because that really is the most common type of intervention that physicians perform, is some type of medication or a medication change. All of this feeds back upon itself, right? So you make these changes, well, the patient changes, right? This treatment changed. And so now we have new information. And this is a recursive loop, so you can imagine how the amount of information amplifies very rapidly, even for one given patient. And we've got real issues with this information. So there are a lot of ways one could think about information in healthcare. This is the Jay way of thinking about it, and this is just my view of what is good information or better information. It should be timely. Example, the stuff that I used to deal with, which are heart attacks, MIs, right? They happen generally in the middle of the night for some reason, but they can happen during the day too. And it's a very rapid thing. As you know, at this point, we want to have the artery open within 90 minutes of the start of the infarction, right? That's really quick. You got to have a lot of information in a very timely fashion. It has to be precise. You know, generalities are great, but they're not useful if you're the doctor or nurse actually making decisions on that given patient. So it has to be very precise. It has to be complete. I can't just have some of the information. I'd like to have all of the information, right? I've got to be able to get it wherever this happens to be. It could be in the ambulance, it could be at home, it could be in the emergency room or in the cath lab or the operating room. It has to be actionable. It's got to be obvious to the healthcare provider what to do on the basis of that information. And be amazed, most of the time it is not obvious at all. It requires a lot of mental gyrations to figure it out. Interpretable. If I require two other physicians to help me interpret the information, which is very often the case, you'd be amazed how often that is the case, that is not terribly useful either. So if we had all of those things, we could have a very nice, proactive, efficient healthcare system with good outcomes and low cost, right? Which is what we all want. But that's not what we have, so we have a reactive system, which we all hear about it every single day in the news, about how bad it is, how expensive it is. But at the center of it is this chain of information. And I'll just give you a couple examples just to put it into real life terms of what we're talking about. So these are just a variety of tests. You've probably had many of these tests, or your family members have had them. Let's just apply a little checklist to these tests, see if they meet these criteria. Timely, not a single one of them. Blood tests, x-rays, none of them are timely. Even a finger stick at home is actually not timely. Are they precise? They're actually fairly precise in the narrow scope of what they're doing. They're fairly precise, I would say. Are they complete? Within, again, the narrow scope of what they're doing, I'll be generous and call them complete. They're accessible? They're not. None of them are very accessible. Actionable? By and large, they're not actually actionable. If we had more time, I'd walk you through that, but they're not actionable. And they're often difficult to interpret. Some of the simple ones are easy, but most of them require you to work with another specialty to get additional information. And this is for physicians, let alone for patients. So what we really want is a system like this, and this is what CardioMEMS set out to do. We want to have effective information, which will emanate most likely from devices, either implanted or wearable. This information then is used to alter, adjust the treatment regimen of the patient, and this feeds back upon itself, and then what we end up ideally is better outcomes. And together this system is called integrated chronic disease management, and CardioMEMS is one of the first examples of that type of system. But you're going to see a lot more of this. This is, I'm convinced, the future. This is how we can take what we have without inventing all sorts of further new treatments, which we will keep doing, but this we can use what we have today to dramatically improve outcomes and reduce cost. So here's the test case. This is heart failure. And it's a great test case because it's the most expensive public health issue that we have in the United States and most of the world. And what's happened is in the last 30 years, we did a really good job in cardiology and the healthcare system in general of reducing the consequences of having a heart attack. It used to be you had a heart attack, you had a 20–30% chance of dying. Now it's down to 5%. So most patients with a heart attack stay alive and go home. Now, the consequence is that you have more people alive who have got heart disease. And in some cases, they will develop heart failure. So now we have an epidemic we have reduced the acute disease, and now we have an epidemic of a chronic disease. And chronic things tend to be very expensive, as we know. So there's 1 million hospitalizations per year. Just the hospitalization cost just to Medicare, and Medicare is about half of this, so it's $20 billion a year. It's the single largest item in the Medicare budget. The overall cost of heart failure to Medicare is $50 billion a year. So these are big numbers, let alone the clinical consequences for the patients who are getting hospitalized. And what is the problem? The problem is that physicians are relying on symptoms. The symptoms that the patient has of congestion. And congestion is one of those wonderfully understated words. This is not nasal congestion, okay? This is congestion of the lungs. This is the lungs filling up with water, the patient drowning. And if you have acute pulmonary congestion, you will die unless you are treated. It's a serious event, and that's where we treat patients right now. If we could just do it a little bit sooner, in the right patient, though, in the right time, we can't just do it in generalities, then we could prevent this, and the patient would do a lot better, and you wouldn't be having him in the hospital in a ventilator in an ICU running up a $10,000 bill per day. And so, obviously, I was not the first one to think about this. This is a problem that a lot of people have thought about for a long time. And many approaches were tried. And this is where we get into the precise nature of those lists that I talked about. So people tried to measure lung water by running a little current through the chest. They weighed people every day. They did blood tests called BNP at home. They had rooms this large full of nurses calling patients every single day. Every single day you got a phone call from a nurse. None of those led to better outcomes. The daily patient, what do you think the results were when they got a phone call every single day from a nurse? How do you think they did compared to the control group? Any guesses? No difference in two large, multi-thousand patient randomized trials. So just having information per se is not useful. Just having interaction, just talking, I know we'd love to believe that, but no, just talking doesn't do it either. It has to be meaningful information and exchange. So when we drill down, what do we really do? We want to have the information we have when we're inside the heart. That's what we'd really like, right? We'd want cardiac cath type of data. When we put a tube inside somebody's heart, we know exactly what's going on, and we've got really precise data. Well, that's what we really want, all right? So how do we go about getting that without doing a cardiac catheterization? We obviously can't do that very often. And that's what we set about to do at CardioMEMS, and we designed a system which has a device, an implant, which gets the information. We have a controller or an electronics unit which interfaces with the device, and then we have a user interface, the database. This is the complete system. So this terminology, device, controller, interface, is important because you'll see that's what the other devices in the future are going to have the same kind of architecture, this three-component architecture, okay? And then you have this feedback loop that I showed you earlier in the abstract. Well, here this is in a concrete application. You've got the patient, you've got information going to the care team, which acts upon it. The patient then changes, and it's a recursive care loop. Now, the team we had at CardioMEMS was fantastic. In each area, they created stuff that had never existed. World-class science done right here in Atlanta, not too far from here. The world's first fully wafer fabricated device, done here, not in San Francisco. The first MEMS-based sensor, the world's most stable sensor. This is a sensor that never needs calibration, all done by scientists here. The first medical implant which is powered through radio, RF power, the first device done here. and a user interface which is the most intuitive, easy user interface in healthcare. So really remarkable series of firsts, but it's not really enough to have cool technology. We have to show that it makes a difference. And certainly the FDA and Medicare want to know that it makes a difference. So we have to show that we can actually improve an outcome. In this case, the biggest item in the healthcare budget, which is the heart failure hospitalizations. Can we improve that? Can we affect the cost of healthcare? Can we improve quality of life? All very relevant parameters. So we set out to show that, and we did that in a large randomized trial performed at 64 hospitals around the country, including several in the Atlanta area and in Georgia. We took 550 patients. They all received an implant. They all got a device, and they all took readings every day. So this was a pretty rigorous trial design. In the control group, the data was not accessible to the physician. The patient thought they were getting treated, but they were not getting treated on the basis of the data. The physician did not have access to it. In the treatment group, they had access to the data. So in the treatment group, decisions are made on the usual metrics with the addition of this intracardiac information. In the control group, only on the basis of the usual metrics. And the primary endpoint was heart failure hospitalizations at 6 months, but we had data really out to several years. And so what we saw was this. The blue line are hospitalizations in the control group, and the red line is the treatment group. So at 6 months, you see a dramatic reduction, and after 6 months, the reduction is even larger. So a 45% reduction. Now, those of you who pay attention to outcomes, this is a very large reduction. This is a very large treatment effect. Most drugs that we use have treatment effects in the order of 10%. 45% is very large, and it only took 550 patients. That's why it wasn't a 5,000 patient study, right? The number needed to treat, which is a very effective public health policy instrument, this is how many patients do I have to treat to have an event, to prevent an event, right? So you can have treatments that have a 50% relative risk reduction, but it takes 2 million patients to prevent one event. That's not, the NNT would be 2 million. That's not very effective, right? The NNT here is 4. Most things that we use in medicine have NNTs of 30, 40, even 100. So this is highly efficient. On the basis of this, the FDA approved the device, but even more importantly, Medicare reimburses the device and reimburses it every which way, inpatient, outpatient, the doctor, the monitoring, and recently, a couple of months ago, they announced that CardioMEMS is one of the few devices to qualify for the new technology add-on, which is a 50% uptick to the DRG. And this is done for technology that is meaningful and improves outcomes in a significant fashion. So this is all based on information, because we didn't create a left ventricular assist device. We didn't create a new drug. All we did was to let the doctors and nurses get the right information about their patients so they could use the current treatment. You know, there are 20 medications for heart failure already. It's not like we're lacking medications. They could use the current medications in a better fashion. So that is the power of information. Then what's the future? So when we think about this, implants are terrific, and I'm a guy who, spent my life putting in stents and all kind of stuff into people, so implants are terrific, but are there other ways to do this? So let's talk about that for a little bit. Implants have a lot of advantages. Fidelity, in the classic sense of the word. The information is precise, it's controllable, it's accurate. Reliability, they tend to keep working. And in some ways, there's less patient burden, because if you're going to have something for 5, 10 years, it's better just to get it implanted versus trying to have it wear it all the time. Privacy, you may not want people to know that you have a disease. You may not want to have something on your hand or your arm that signals that you have a disease. Comfort, for long periods of time, implants are actually more comfortable than wearables. But wearables have certain advantages. The biggest one is self-evident, they're non-invasive. And the other nice thing is that they're upgradable constantly, right? So, if you look at what's happening in consumer stuff, if you look at what's happening, in cars, if you buy a Tesla, it is upgraded constantly versus your regular car is not upgraded constantly. So there are a lot of benefits to upgradability. And when we think about this, you're all inundated with all these different types of, everybody's getting in it, Apple's in it now, so all the big guys are getting into wearables, into healthcare. They see healthcare as this big pile of money and they want to get a piece of it, right? So we're seeing a lot of activity, but how should we really think about the form factor, the properties of a wearable? And a lot of this work was done actually here in Atlanta at Georgia Tech by Dr. Jay Yadav, who's in the engineering department there, and really was way, way ahead of the curve. And I had the pleasure of getting to know him a little bit. And these are the attributes that he thought, and I agree with, are good attributes for wearable healthcare technology. And you'd probably agree with them. I won't go through all of them. And when you get done with all of it, and I'm leaving out a lot of slides here, you end up with fabric. When you think through it all, you really want fabric. You don't want stuff stuck to you. It does not work well. Anybody who's been in the hospital, had an EKG lead stuck to them, knows that that is not something you want to do for very long. So you really want fabric, and Dr. Jay Yadav designed the concept of a wearable motherboard, fabric as computation, as a computer. And he did this work back in the 1990s for the Defense Department. And by the way, the CardioMEMS technology, a lot of it is based on DARPA funding also. So the government can do a lot of wonderful things in addition to NASA that are useful to us. And so this was his early work. This is the Garmin as a sensor, and you can see where the computational elements are on that in the middle panel there. And then the first smart shot actually is in the Smithsonian back in 1998. So he was way ahead of the curve. And it looks has kind of a military look to it because that's what it was designed for. And he got really pretty good data. I don't know if you can see this here, but on the left side, the first little bit is a regular EKG. On the right side is an EKG through the shirt. And an EKG is actually a very rigorous test for where it's actually pretty hard to get a good EKG. Believe it or not, it's not so easy. So this, I was skeptical when he told me all this, and then I became a little more convinced when I saw the data. So you can actually get pretty high fidelity information with this technology, and he could measure a lot of other things: respiration, oximetry, temperature, obviously, and it was. Prevented bullet penetration too, so that was useful there. However, the problems that he had were the last two things. Remember I showed you the architecture, device, controller, interface? Well, the last two were lacking in the 1990s because Bluetooth had been thought about but didn't exist. Didn't have smartphones, so he had a complicated communication mechanism. And he had a big display. So it never quite took off because the other components were not ready. But guess what? Now they're here. So now there are 5 companies with either beta or just launching versions of his work. None of them are in Atlanta, unfortunately. But again, the same architecture. They have a device, which is the clothing. They have a controller, which is a Bluetooth module that you put in the sleeve, and you have a display, which is your smartphone, right? So this is, I found this fascinating, and the number of sensors is really impressive. So this Garmin that you can buy for $200, I don't think this one is launched yet, but it's about to launch, for $200 has, 28 sensors in it. Okay, that's Dave Stern is here. That's a little different cost equation than we have at CardioMEMS, right? But it's pretty incredible, and you can get some pretty good, and it's machine washable. But I don't know if you can see that in your screen, but you're getting muscle activity, heart rate, and respiratory rate. Now this is actually more information than Piedmont Hospital or Emory Hospital gets on you when you're in a hospital bed over there. All we get, we get more heart information. We can actually see the EKG tracing, but we don't get respiratory rate, and we don't get any activity level. So just with a shirt that you can buy on the internet, you can actually get a lot of data, which has a lot of healthcare implications and applications. And the other neat thing with some of this technology is that you're able to segment different parts of the body. You can actually isolate the muscle group that is involved. So clearly, for the whole universe of orthopedic, physical medicine, rehabilitation, stroke therapy, even Parkinson's, you could see how this would have tremendous applications in helping take care of patients. So when I think about this, in summary, I think there are certain things that are best done with implantables, such as intra-body data. If I don't know intracranial pressure or intracardiac pressure, that's probably best done with implantable. Managing other devices, if I want to manage your pacemaker or ventricular assist device, I want to have an implant. But there's some things that you can't do with implants, that you need wearables. If you want to gauge overall effort level, which some of these technologies do, right, or workload, how many watts are you able to produce, which is a very important metric, actually. That's better done with wearables. Then a lot of stuff can be done with either one, depending on the situation. You can get a lot of the stuff in the middle, heart rate, respiratory rate, ventilation, ECG, blood glucose, and other things. You can get it with either one. So I think in the next few years, we're going to have a lot of choices on how we get this information, how we take care of patients and non-patients, people who are not patients, but just want to have this information. So really the application will be across all of medicine, the big specialties, but also a lot of other areas. The challenge is really going to be regulatory and reimbursement. All of these companies, I've spoken to a couple of them, have gone to great lengths to not have any healthcare claims. So they are really targeting the active, athletic individual who's very obsessed about athletic performance. But at some point, I think they will have the courage to try to get some FDA claims and get reimbursement. And I think that'll really open up a lot of options for us in healthcare. So in conclusion, this really is the future. And I think a lot of it can take place right here in Atlanta, given our strengths in engineering, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, our incredibly strong IT industry. We can help shape that future here. And as probably a professor of yours somewhere back in college or graduate school, probably you may have heard the phrase that mathematics is the queen of the sciences. I heard it. I don't know if anybody else heard it since then. But so I think today one could say, in analogy, that information really is the queen of healthcare. And if we can really leverage this, we can really improve outcomes for all of our patients. Thank you.